The Why Didn't You Test That podcast want to improve your software. Join Hugh, Rich and their guests. They share experiences and insights on the many sides of better software delivery.
Hello everyone, we're back. All right, I'm just going to do a little bit of an intro to Marcus Merrell from Source Labs, the VP of Technology Strategy for Source Labs, to build out the platform into the kind of the tools he's always wanted for your 20 plus years career, although you look a lot younger than me. As a test data automation architect, seems pretty obsessed with talking to people out of shooting for code coverage on focusing on risk. Been working with Selenium for about 15 years, I think, which means he knows when to use it and, importantly, when not to use it. Okay, Marcus, what we're going to do is we're going to unleash you for a little bit, and what we're probably going to do then is Rich. Rich is generally the voice of sanity and the user in these podcasts. And then I'll probably just come and have a little mini rant from time to time. So, Marcus, why don't you just kind of give us your state of the nation?
All right. Yeah. So it's interesting when you're asked a question like this after so long, you gotta pick at least one area under the umbrella to talk about. I remember it reminds me of a book report I had to write in fourth grade when they said, "What are you going to write your book report about?" I'm like, World War II. I'm like, okay, pick something a little narrower than that, and this is kind of the same thing. So the thing I've been thinking about lately is why has there been overall such a profound lack of real innovation in the testing space over the past 20 years? Like, we've had a few things. We've had Selenium WebDriver come along and displace Quick Test Professional from the big tool sets. We've had some real innovations in visual testing, some real innovations in model-based testing. Otherwise, we're kind of doing the same thing we've been doing. And meanwhile, dev and software development has moved along at an amazing pace. And so why has that happened? It's because people still consider testing to be, by and large, a janitorial effort. Sweeping the floors, cleaning up the stuff. It's something that you have to do, not something that anybody wants to do. It's a cost center. And I, frankly, reject all of that. I think it's actually, it's about revenue protection and revenue growth, not just cleaning up and being a cost structure. But I think that the last part of that is when I look at testing and whether or not people are still talking about whether or not it's relevant, which is insane. So we as testers, we tend to be the first to go during a layoff. Yet when software makes front page news, it's not because of innovation, it's because of defects. It's because bad stuff shows up. You got a major ticket seller dying, in last November because Taylor Swift announced she was going to go on tour. And it's because all these things get defunded, they get prioritized, and yet when the chickens come home to roost, they ask you, why didn't you catch that bug? Mr. Tester, why didn't you catch that bug? And the answer is, well, I also didn't write the damn thing. Like I didn't catch it, but I didn't write it. Somebody else wrote it. This is a team effort. So this whole big rant that I'm going on right now is all coming down to the fact that people in test don't tend to stay in test. We got 2-3 years with someone as a tester before they move on to what they call real developer work or feature development work. There's a few of us insane people like you and me, Hugh, who actually stay in the industry and try to keep people in, keep innovation going, keep things moving. But there's, I don't know, 200 in the world, maybe 500. I don't know. There's not many. I feel like I know most of them. So what I think I'm saying is there's a combination of things going on here. Testers haven't made themselves relevant enough. And that's a statement I'm prepared to make. We haven't taken charge. We haven't taken our seat at the table at the executive level to inform the company about, or the organization you work for, about the kinds of risks that you're exposing yourself to with your software practices. And at the same time, that has freed up this misconception that the testers are, irrelevant. It's partially because we get into rabbit hole syndrome. We say, hey, that's a cool thing to test. I'm going to go in and I'm going to see every little combination. I actually once wrote up a bug in 2002, I think, that said, here's a huge priority bug. This is a big problem because when I enter Arabic text into this form field, it enters it right to left. But when it renders it later, it renders the letters left to right. And I thought this is a major issue. Why? Because I'm studying Arabic in the time, and it's kind of a fascination for me. But it was for a regional e-commerce company in Texas. Not a priority. So I was part of the problem, and it was explained to me, kind of quickly at that point. You gotta focus on what's actually important. I once had a team of people write hundreds of tests for, an area of the software that less than 1% of our users used, didn't generate a dime of revenue. I was not taking my seat at the table as a relevant person who studied risk. So for the past 10 years or so, I've been focusing almost all of my philosophical efforts toward making this vocation relevant and important and necessary. I guess just as a final anecdote, I was working for retailmenot.com. Anyone who goes on LinkedIn can see that I was there for 8 years. Major e-commerce company pushing billions and billions of transactions every day. And at one point, the analytics were doing the math wrong. They were figuring out this weird calculation that had to happen to illustrate a point about lift and conversion. And I can get into the details if you'd like. But the math was being done wrong. And we were losing money because the signals that we were getting from our users were being miscalculated and put into the wrong bucket. And we weren't able to charge the right commission, rank the right stuff in our search algorithm, stuff like that. And I implemented a method for testing this in an automated fashion around 2013 or so. And that instantly protected the revenue of the company, covered the most major risks happening at that organization, put QA on the map, and the CEO suddenly knew all of our names because we were important, and he never sort of forgot that. And I think even on his next job, his next company, he brought along the importance of QA and stuff like that. So that's my current rant. We are being relegated because we haven't taken the time ourselves to make ourselves relevant. Does that make sense?
To me, absolutely. I think you play. To me, there's two sides of it, right? I think I'm going to kind of massively generalize in terms of a lot of conversations I've been in the last couple of years talk almost exclusively about the need for SDETs in organizations. And straight up to me, that kind of talks about a commodity around automation and not a lot else. And especially if you talk to some of the SDETs, right, they are not really testers. They are people that have come from a developer background and are more interested in writing code, right? And that whole analysis piece seems to have gone missing, right? And I think, from a broader development methodologies and organizational perspective, I think, again, massive generalization, but I think if you look at kind of the preachings of Agile or DevOps, for example, it will be, well, what do you do in test? We automate it, right? And again, it's boiled it down to a commodity. And so when you're going up to kind of the C levels and you say, what do you want from testers? Well, hang on, they are just instruction runners, right? I want to automate them. I want to do away with them. And therefore, I think, interestingly, the point you made, right, around testing is something almost a tax on what you need to do for an organization, and that's where it's seen. And I think to your point, and especially where we play in the kind of the model-based world, is in terms of how do you bring in that value add in terms of, and I guess it's more moving towards testing as a discipline into the more quality conversation in terms of, I think, our role, and I think especially, maybe in your example, right, what did you do? You codified the business rule that became very useful, because if that didn't happen, those business rules get forgotten, right? And therefore, things come and bite us in the ass 6 months time down the line, or much further down the line. So I think certainly in my experience of building teams that have done model-based testing, that is where the value add comes in terms of, are we testers anymore, or are we actually analysts that go right the way up the level, right? Cliches coming out all over the shop, but this is where testing goes into quality, in my opinion. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, Marcus or Hugh.
Let me just pick up. We'll come back to that one a little bit. I think I just want to pick up for a little bit. No. I think this is the main rub of the discussion. But let's just talk about the philosophy, the word philosophy, because I think that is the thing that is dramatically missing from. In our previous podcast, we sort of skirted around this a little bit, and I think it's the fact that people don't take the time to actually sit back and think. I mean, there's a sort of nice if you look back when did humanity move on the most? It was when the Greeks were around and they had a class of people who actually didn't work. They just sat around and thought. Okay. Then nothing much happened until the French Reformation, when you had a kind of a landed gentry who basically, again, sat around and did nothing. Then you moved on to the English, who then just had a lot of people who were the third sons, who were the vicars, who only worked for 2 hours a week. And they then pushed on humanity. So let's just talk about philosophy and how you actually manage to persuade an organization to spend time thinking. Now, thinking is not what people do naturally. They're if you try and talk to someone about, well, what do you think the problem is, they'll just, immediately head for a symptom, and they don't really actually sit back and think. There's not really a philosophy, and it's not just testing. It's a philosophy of better software. There's not a philosophy of how you organize yourself, how you put space into your time. We talked briefly about refactoring. Refactoring is pretty fundamental. Otherwise, you just build up more and more technical debt, and everything collapses. And that's pretty much every company, major company that I'm talking to at the moment. But this idea of actually spending time and saying, look, let's just have 2 days away and look at, well, what does the developer do? Right, they're doing most of the time in C#. Okay, let's look at the libraries in there. Let's just do a little analysis of them. Do they have common coding standards? Do they vary so much that it's just causing problems? Let's look at some bugs and do some root cause analysis. That's interesting. So yeah, it's a B-, but it's not too bad. Okay, well, what about the requirements? I mean, where do they come from? Do we have a glossary? Everyone talks about ChatGPT, but ChatGPT ain't going to work without a glossary, because you'll just, words will just get mangled up with decisions, So this kind of idea of spending time and sitting back and thinking, and, I guess what's happened with Marcus and, what you managed to achieve is that you managed to sit back, think, reassess, come up with a strategy to make yourself more relevant, which then kind of basically hit the bullseye. And but you've sort of done the thinking on your own. It wasn't like an organizational sort of think, was it? And another thing we talked about in the previous podcast was the idea of that the managers are not technical enough, to go to the word C, where they have not got a deep understanding of technology. Then they need to deeply trust the people that they have on their team, and they also need to empower people that they know are more philosophical and can take problems and use critical thinking and are not driven by an agenda. Now, an agenda for, say, an SI is more revenue, or maintaining revenue or not losing revenue, but you should be able to create an organization with enough people in it who have enough experience or have enough imagination. I think we talked to one of the banks in Brazil, and they've got a kind of an accelerated program for young guns who come up, and they actually come in, and their mission statement is to think more broadly, and I think that may well be kind of the root of a lot of these problems. Again, we talked a little bit too much about sort of symptoms a little bit, but maybe that idea of having more space to think, even if it's just 3 days every 3 months, and you all just go somewhere and don't look at your emails and don't look at your features and don't look, maybe one way to go. Anyway, sorry, that was a massive aside there. Apologies for being so long.
No, but I think there's a lot to that, because I've had managers who've stood over my shoulder every 15 minutes and said, "Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet?" Before I've even gotten the diagnosis right. Our CEO, Alan Miles, always talks about diagnosis, solution, alignment, execution. And there's so many situations where you don't even get you start with execution, and you don't have alignment. Nobody knows what you're doing. You don't have a solution. You don't really know how to approach or what the end state is. And maybe you didn't even diagnose properly. I was once asked by a CTO late in my career at that same company. I was asked by the CTO, it wasn't a request, it was a command. "You will deliver me 100% code coverage in your automated testing." And my reaction to that more or less was to all but quit
Yeah,
on this.
sorry, you missed my cackling laugh there.
Oh,
I mean, if if you've got a really good programmer who's got lots of error traps, that means you've got to test every single error trap, and sometimes the error trap has another error trap in it.
yeah.
So you'd be there for ever and a day, and the chance of it ever happening is so rare. It's just not worth the risk.
Well,
You know.
that analytics problem I told you about, that problem was introduced into, so before we did A/B testing, so we introduced it, just a tiny little incremental change to the algorithm and the way the analytic signals are calculated, which means that there is a key value pair as a part of an asynchronous HTTP request that's sent after every click on every element in the user interface. A single key value pair was being miscalculated. There is no way code coverage would have told us about the problem. It would have shown 100% branch coverage, 100% line coverage. You absolutely covered it just by executing your tests. That was a qualitative bug that would never have been caught because it was a data problem. And that bug, potentially, I think in 4 hours of it being released into production, it cost us in the neighborhood of $500,000 before we did the rollback. So one of the most expensive bugs, one of the most economically expensive bugs, meaning it took probably 10 minutes of effort to break it that badly. And it would never have been caught if I had even if my only target had been 100% code coverage, I would have been stuck saying, let me make sure I've got 99% coverage on this piece of crap feature nobody ever cares about, or some error trap that will never be encountered unless somebody literally switches off the servers within AWS, and, something I can't even control. And I would have been focused on that and not focused on the business. And I think that some testers are directed to operate this poorly, and some testers just don't have any other context or any other frame of reference for how to operate better than that. So you're right. I think it requires reflection and thinking and sitting back and once in a while contemplating what are the real risks to this business. You're absolutely right.
So let's turn this a little bit into what can people do then. I mean, I've got some ideas. Rich has actually done this in the real world, so he's probably the one to go with this. And then if I might add one or two, if you two want to just talk about that.
Yeah.
So, what does an organization do? What the hell do they do to try and change this beyond saying, right, let's have a 3-day offsite?
Yeah.
To me, interested in kind of Marcus's take, especially in that one example, right? And that I see there's a massive cultural problem in organizations around we must deliver yesterday, right? And then that forces that kind of behavior in terms of JFDI, right? Just do that task because I think it gets me to the end goal, rather than actually why are you even doing it, right? And unfortunately, where we've done, it's a long game in trying to change that cultural behavior. It's systemic, and it takes a hell of a lot of time. And for us, it's finding pockets of kind of early adopters that see the problem, and then lots of people in organizations kind of go with the flow. It is what it is. I can't change it. Apathy, right? But you've got a pocket of people in there that think actually this is wrong. I want to try and do it better. There's numerous reasons for wanting to try and do it better, but there is a pocket that is there to do it right. And to me, once you can incubate that and get that kind of diffusion and innovation going, you have a great social proof story to then try and create that cultural change with an organization. That's obviously a bottom up approach. To be honest, I've not seen a top down. Sorry.
I've not seen it, but I'm not sure it's impossible. I think that proof point, that story you're talking about, I mean, all of this is going to be vertical dependent, and as well as dependent on the actual company you work for, and all of the political and soft and social and technical ramifications. I mean, it's very tailor-made to it's bespoke, I guess you'd say. So culturally, I have been able to change this from below. But it is difficult. You basically just have to prove your value in a very significant way, and get those stories, those proof points. But yeah, I mean, it's rough. I can imagine it happening top down.
I mean, what's
Yeah.
the point of being a manager and coming in and being able to change something? I mean, the only managers that recently I've been dealing with are ones that have just been coming and told to cut costs, which is just, I mean, it's so what, I mean, they will cut costs for the wrong reasons. They'll cut the wrong bits out, they'll chop the heart out. I mean, look at Mr. Musk and Twitter, let's get rid of all the main developers. And he's lost all of his core kind of historical understanding of how the business works, and then you panicking and trying to do catch up. And that happens kind of loads in organizations.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in terms of how you can probably restructure I mean, we've talked a little bit about this before, about this centralization of having, the center of incompetence or a center of excellence, and then the diffusion out into having those, you must have standards. The rest of the business is run on standards. If you have a delivery truck, the training is absolutely meticulous. You cannot have things out there because all is this liability insurance right, left and center. Everything is processed up the wazoo. They know exactly from a time a person enters a shop, when they're moving around the shop, what are they seeing in which particular order. Every single other part of the business has some kind of structure. Why doesn't IT? It's this sort of magic misunderstanding of how it all works. And, it's become, you mentioned componentized, this kind of, siloing out into people, into these skill sets. I'm a tester, I just do this, with no great understanding of how things to get put together. You need to be very clear about, there are standards in this organization. I'm the manager, and this is the way it's going to work. This is the way we release. This is the way the code should look. These are the types of errors. This is how we report a bug. This is how we measure the different types of coverage. This is how we design test cases. There are about sort of 20 or 30 top metrics that you could go through and say, where are we now? Probably only take a week to whiz across an entire organization of probably 200 to 500 people and be able to work that out pretty quickly. And then you say, right, which are the ones that we need to talk about? Which are the ones that, have caused the most problems? Let's prioritize those ones to start with. But then you need to have this philosophy of saying, well, how are we going to get these teams? If most of the bugs are going to probably come from the requirements, or from a lack of understanding of your own systems, which is technical debt, in that they don't really understand their own systems, because it's kind of grown over time. It's got, I'll say, bad data in inverted commas. It's bad now, but it wasn't bad at the time, as the evolution of data. So there's lots of common things that happen, but you just need to be able to measure it, and then you need to have a blueprint of getting there. And that blueprint does not necessarily mean the dreaded words moving forward. Sometimes it means moving sideways, to kind of reposition yourself so you can move forward. So I think if there's any kind of senior QA managers listening into this, senior CIO, CEOs, you can massively make a difference relatively quickly. Within 2 to 3 sprints, you should be able to come across and make some fairly substantial differences to the speed or the quality, or not creating so much technical debt as you move through your development life cycle. Let's look at the way people are trained. Let's look at how people are incented. We made one change when we were working on the Disney project where as part of the sprint points that teams awarded themselves, which I always find somewhat amazing, we basically said, well, the test data team gets a bunch of data requests from you, and if the quality of those, we're going to adjust your sprint points that you award yourself. That was a massive change in behavior. Suddenly, all the information requests that came through, they were fully filled in. We had access to all of the all of the requirements documents. We had all the glossary information. Anytime they made a change to one of the definitions, they would come immediately to us, rather than, oh, we forgot about you guys, we don't care. So being able to change that kind of the behavior should be easy. We're all in tech, it's pretty straightforward to change the processes, whether it's Jira flows, whether it's this kind of thing. And there's so many tools out there. I mean, that's the thing I find a bit depressing, is there's so much good stuff out there. I mean, you could go to Git, set up a small team of 2 to 3 programmers and one really good QA manager, and set up a whole bunch of kind of metrics running automatically on your organization. Piece of cake.
Mm-hmm.
Absolute piece of cake. Most of it would be open source. You might have to buy a few bits of products here. Once you've got those metrics, then you've got something to measure against. But then I guess the downside of that is, after a while, that's all people care about. It's just those metrics, And then they'll start trying to cheat the system, I suppose.
I get it. do you not see though that the democratization of organizations in the name of agile or whatever kind of is a move away from that? I'm going to say centralized reporting capability, but the perception of heavy bureaucracy, because that's the counter argument, right? To all teams having to conform to the one preacher, so to speak.
Yeah, but if you think about okay, well, let's talk about a few things. One is that one team never is in isolation. You've got 20 or 30 teams who are all talking to each other. They're all trying to they're all having to move to, this one needs to finish before that one. I can't work on this one before that one's finished because that's the booking system, and I can't do the pricing of the booking system without the booking system. So all of those teams have to communicate with each other. Centralization. There has to be a clear method of communication between teams. Bingo. And that's it. End of,
They do have to, but do they?
I wonder.
Well, if they don't, then you just say, the communication from this team is poor, fix it. Otherwise, what's the point of having a manager? You just literally say, well, let's just have Wild West.
I don't disagree with this, right? But this is where you go to most organizations and they've got highly coupled architectures, right? And it's all because over such a period of time, Conway's law has taken effect, right? And because those teams don't communicate effectively with each other, the interface isn't that well understood. And therefore, because it's not understood, it's bolted together in an integrated environment. And therefore, what you find is priorities are muddled up, and there's a massive queuing system when it comes to integrated environments, right? That's almost the mitigation.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if some sort of top-down mandate around contract testing might be one of the first or maybe only top-down things you could do. A team that does that kind of contract testing with everything they depend on and make sure that their contracts are good for anything that depends on them, it seems like it's going to be a pretty good gateway to better communication.
Yeah. Another part to that, which I don't see too often, right, is that contract-based testing should be a follow-on to good architectural principles around loose coupling, good design principles around it should be, but doesn't seem to follow on, right? And therefore, if test approaches are not complementing those things, you should see architectures and designers and all these kicking up a massive fuss about, hang on a minute, you're not doing all these things, but you don't see it. Well, I don't see it anyway.
I don't see it. I wonder if it's once again a symptom of the fact that contract testing is a somewhat technical thing. Any QA SDET who knows how to do contract testing is probably going to move into feature development and not continue, building on the kinds of innovations and stuff like that you need. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it just seems like I agree with you. I don't see industry-wide rigor on contract testing. I mean, for example, Sauce Labs, we just released about 4 months ago a contract testing feature as part of our API testing solution. I thought, as a 20-year QA person who would have killed for this feature 15 years ago, I would have killed to have this kind of thing. Thought it was going to be #1 best-selling, fly off the shelves, and it's it's doing okay. But it's like I thought people were going to clamor to our door for this, and it's just maybe the word hasn't gotten out. I don't know. I mean, I also think that a lot of folks have a lot more fundamental problems than contract testing, but it seems like that would be just sort of there's an objective statement you can make about whether or not you're done contract testing, unlike most other kinds of testing where you kind of don't know, hey, maybe we're done testing this, maybe we're not, but contract testing, you're very objective proof in that. So yeah, I don't know, it just all these interactions between teams, to me, is one of the root causes of so much of the angst we have. I mean, particularly in the case of the Taylor Swift ticket thing, that is all about microservices and performance testing and chaos testing and stuff like that, where you're just trying to coordinate a massive amount of activity, tens of millions of requests, and insecurity also because you have a giant botnet attacking you at the same time. So it's really just coordinate. Like they need like probably a team of people just coordinating that kind of activity, which is once again getting into bureaucracy. But I kind of don't see how else you do it.
In that scenario, then, is that not the kind of the go slower to go faster. And although there is a perception of you need a team to do that, it's actually going to save you money in the long run, right? Because you've not got the rework, you've not got the outage, right?
Yeah.
So it's a false economy in terms of the way we work today, isn't it?
I think so. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. I mean, I agree completely. I agree with that with all testing, all thoughtful testing. Although, I mean, you can do worthless testing. Obviously, we should not be doing, and a lot of us are doing too much of that. But I think thoughtful testing is always going to save you in the end. It's always going to be a net positive and a positive ROI, not a cost center.
I like that phrase, false economy. I mean, maybe it's maybe that's instead of saying the word, let's spend some philosophical time sitting around, let's look for areas where we've had false economies in the past, because the people can get their head around that. They say, oh yeah, we kind of spent all this time doing this, whereas actually, or we cut back on this and then this happened later, which caused complete carnage. Therefore, that was a mistake. Therefore, we should address this. And maybe it's just a simpler thing for people to get their heads around. I mean, I would say that when we go to these, the last one I went to was EuroSTAR, so the last EuroSTAR, and I've got to say that there was very little philosophical discussion. There was very little discussion about kind of how people in test. They seemed quite sort of happy with themselves and sort of relatively smug in terms of, this is what we do for a living, and it's a nice little job, and I come in the morning and go home. Whereas if you are in the world of quality, you should be constantly shaking and jumping up and down and complaining and saying, well, we need to rethink this and we should do this differently. And there doesn't seem to be that any kind of sort of aggression almost to say no. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
This is complete nonsense. You are just storing up a problem. Fine, you're on your bonus, but basically this time next year, all of your features are going to come to a dying halt because you're going to be dealing with so much technical debt. Absolutely not. And having the confidence to be able to say that. And all you got to do is just go out in the industry and just look at the myriads of examples where this type of stuff happens. I come back to the communication between teams in terms of even the language that teams use to communicate each other. I mean, in my mind, the data is the blood that flows around between teams, and if you can understand the data that's coming in and out, and almost automate that understanding as much as possible, because there's lots of tools that can kind of analyze the data and look for, this set of data is different because of these reasons. We've got more of this type of data and this type. Now we're moving towards this ISO 2022. There's a vast change in the way the data patterns work, and then saying just a small presentation on it. Great, now I understand. I can move forward. But again, a lot of that you can automate. You can just build some of these cool tools and just attach it onto it. And then that team is sitting on solid ground. They're not sort of trying to make guesses or, we got a bug, and you fall through a trapdoor and suddenly there's this chasm of carnage sitting underneath you because you completely didn't understand how this whole piece of data worked, and then suddenly you're about to launch and you're frantically sticking plaster everywhere to try and catch up.
I mean, there is a real fetishism these days around tools, and feel like that is the first thing people talk about well before, and I'm serious. I'm gonna be a little bit generalizing here, but I'm also pretty sure I'm right. People fetishize around tools well before they understand their own business.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I've worked for a web monitoring company, an HR software management company. I've worked for eBay and e-commerce company, and now Sauce Labs. So basically, and also a project management company. So basically, I've worked for SaaS, I've worked for B2C, I've worked for cloud-based, I've worked for on-prem, I've worked for companies where they send out a CD every time we ship every 3 months. And the first thing I do when I change jobs is I understand what our users are trying to accomplish with our tool. I don't go out and say Selenium is the answer. I try to figure out what are people trying to accomplish, and I think that there is a little bit of a lack of that now. I hope I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong, but there is so much churn and drama right now around questions like Selenium versus Cypress, which I actually could give you about an hour-long talk about why you should choose one or the other. And, I basically it's all about trade-offs, right? But most people, don't understand those trade-offs. They just sort of think, oh, Cypress is sexier and faster, let's choose it. When, it is the right answer sometimes. It is also not the right answer sometimes. The other thing is they do that before they understand what the hell their users are even trying to do. I was talking to someone not long ago who said, we are going to move from Selenium to Cypress because Cypress is faster. And I said, wait a minute. I understand your website well enough to know that on occasion, you have to click a button that's going to launch a new tab where you have to switch context to that tab and operate within that browser on the new tab. Cypress is incapable of doing that. It is impossible to do that with Cypress because of design limitations. And they're like, oh, we're planning $1 million transition without understanding the most fundamental aspects of our software, let alone the limitations of the tool itself. It's fashion-driven development, as Simon Stewart would say. And so, sorry, you got another mini rant for free. It's just, we should not fetishize tools over strategy. We should not fetishize coverage over risk analysis. And I think that both of those things happen every single day in this industry. To your point about EuroSTAR, Hugh, absolutely. And we're going to see each other there in 2 months. Hopefully things are better.
Is that their own individual fetish, or is that guidance that's also based on fetish? Because I've also seen a lot of organisations will reach out to advisors, right, and they're saying the same crap. I'm not sure if we can swear, but I just did.
Actually, I love that comment about fetish. I think that's going to be the tagline for the series. It's very good. We'll pick up a whole new brand of search engines here, search engine searches now.
I don't think they want it.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, so Rich, onwards. So say that again.
I was just saying, individuals kind of making that dumb choice, or there's a whole industry of extremely well-paid consultancies that are also, I'm going to suggest, giving the same kind of guidance, right? And it's based on not a great deal of expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's probably there's a gentleman by the name of David Burns who works actually for a little company called BrowserStack. He is the head of the W3C browser testing and tools working group, and he gave a lecture at Selenium Conference 3 weeks ago about this very thing: the difference between using a tool like Selenium versus using a tool like Cypress or Test Cafe or Puppeteer Playwright. And I think it's a brilliant lecture that anyone should go watch because he's one of the few people in the industry who can really clarify the ones and zeros underlying all these different tool choices. Everyone else out there basically is just saying, Cypress faster, go get it. And it's like, no, hang on. It might be the right tool for you, but there are drawbacks.
Yeah.
And Selenium, of course, has drawbacks, but I mean, it's insane to me that we're fetishizing the argument itself.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about this a little bit before, which was that in most other parts of an organization, say it's doctors, nurses, whether it's supply chain or whatever, you have probably, 30-40% of your revenue is actually spent on providing systems to make their lives more efficient, to make better decisions, to support those decisions. In IT, there is zero almost, it's almost a negligible amount of money spent on systems to support developers, testers, QA, etc. HP came in and ALM took over the world, and that pretty much took all the QA budget for about 20 years. And then there was no more budget for anything else, really. Whereas, nowadays, you buy some basic licenses, you got a few Jira licenses, and a few Jenkins licenses, and you're kind of done. Whereas actually spending time, and I think I talked about it before. A German company I worked with back in the 80s spent 10% of their budget and had 10% of their programs developing to make development faster and better and more automated. I'm not saying automated. Automated documentation and impact analysis was built into the development processes. Now, coming to the point about Cypress and Selenium, what you need is to have probably a stack of 5% of your dev team, or I'll say dev team, and that includes QA and project managers and everything, 5% of your budget to be spent on, okay, well, let's prototype this. Before we make that decision, let's spin up a 2-month prototype and kick it, and actually kick it hard and see, and actually try and run it. And then before we make that decision, and you've gone down the route, etc., they might do a small POC occasionally, but mostly it's just like, go for it. As you say, based on the fetish, the dogma, and the fashion. Whereas actually, if you have enough of a budget in your organization where you're investing in tools to support the right tools and adjusting those tools and dropping tools and picking in new tools and then, getting something from Git, if you have that revenue, then you'd be able to say, okay, it's an interesting, Cypress looks interesting. Let's get that team Team Japan to go and look at this for 6 weeks and report back, and then we'll make a much more informed decision. And I think even those tiny decisions is, again, a little bit of a symptom of the lack of spending enough money and realizing the importance of having a solid revenue base devoted entirely to supporting better software development. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. Agree completely.
So, Rich, how much do you reckon in the companies you work for, have they ever even thought of that as a number?
No, I think, and I'll generalize in terms of IT for IT, but it falls through the cracks in terms of what do we need to do, how much budget we need to set aside, how do we even maintain all of these things. It kind of we go beg, steal, and borrow to projects or areas that exist because they have a capability to do it and budget to do it, and therefore we piggyback on them. Certainly not seen as a kind of a first-class citizen, in my experience, around how to set this thing up to succeed.
Yeah. I mean, we're looking at kind of the master data management space. We sort of accidentally, in our work with test data, created a really cool master data management system. So we've been exploring master data management, and we talked to kind of an industry expert, great guy, and he basically said, well, the problem you've got is budget, but the advantage you have with master data management is 50% of the budget comes from the business, in that it's the business intelligence teams. It's IT that has to implement it, but it's the business intelligence team. So you immediately got a revenue part to go get that. And I'm thinking, well, master data management, that should be a centrally funded thing. And if IT doesn't understand its own data structures across the entire organization, A, it's illegal because of GDPR and California legislation, and B, how the hell are you supposed to make a change to a system if you can't understand, what that data structure is? Where is it updated? Where is the data stored? Where is it historically stored? What log files is it in, et cetera, et cetera? That would seem to be fairly obvious.
Yeah. Daunting problem, but yes.
Okay, so what are we going to do at EuroSTAR then? We're just going to sit there and yell at people, or are we going to come cheerfully and persuade them that there is a need for a reset? Because I don't think I don't think it's always been like this. I mean, when I was in smaller teams of maybe 200 people, when we the technology was simpler in that we only probably had a database, a front end, and a batch system, and the business actually sat amongst us. So we were sitting. I worked for a life insurance company. I was a trainee actuary. I kind of knew the business, but I also had access to everyone. Went to the pub together, everyone talked together. There wasn't really much of a blur, but there was a very much a discipline of IT, and we were very proud of being quite disciplined about what we did. And one of the key things was maintainability. I think that was the first thing that when I was a programmer, someone battered me around the back of the head, stop being such a smart ass, Hugh, and writing really clever code. No one else can maintain this.
Yeah.
You need to be able to write code, and what actually one of my first senior programmer did was split us into teams of two, and I'd have to write the first half, and then the other lady would write the second half, and then we'd swap. And it was just such a good discipline. It was extraordinary how that made you think, oh yeah, this is a bit obscure, There's and then was it C++ took over, and everyone was trying to write 4 symbols to write, the really most complex bit of logic, which no one could ever maintain. But I digress. Anyway, so.
Yeah, I did that with Perl in the late 90s. That was my language, is trying to we had in Perl, you have what you call golf competitions, which means can I get the most functionality into the fewest number of characters? And so, hey, you want to golf that? It's at 100 characters. You can get that down to 60. And fun as an exercise, but not good for production code. Like, absolutely, I would not tolerate that in real life.
I mean, you can create a virtuous circle. I mean, Rich was a virtuous circle himself at Nationwide, in that he managed, pretty much. I mean, you had some Snowy and a few of the other guys around you who were great, sort of created a discipline which people respected, and they could see the effect that it was having, and management seemed to appreciate it, and the industry appreciated it as well. You got a lot of awards, and you made an actual tangible change to that organization.
I think to the risk point, it's interesting, right, in that we put in some quite heavy lifting risks that the organization, not testing risks, these are organizational risks that just were true, right? But probably were never on risks logs and never then acknowledged as you went up the train. And therefore, it's great having a great capability and a great team, but actually if no one's feeling any pain or feeling any pain in the future if something blows up, then how likely are they going to do something, right? So I think it's definitely in something around, certainly, from a testing capability. How do you very quickly make an impact, prove value? That I'll say that in inverted commas. Prove value is very quickly. You can flag up some quite, I'm going to say, scary risks that will be true in an organization that probably aren't actually being managed today.
100%. There were. It almost, in my little case, going back to the Retell Me Not example, they basically were like, hey. This thing is broken. Did you test analytics? And I basically was like, test the what? I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. We weren't aware of the most important single business system in the company. Yeah. And so, I think it's just being mindful and cataloging everything is probably the first order. Asking what's left, what did I miss? What else could be going on?
Absolutely. It gets even worse when I don't know whether the non-functional or quality attributes or whatever we're going with nowadays, but I've seen very few FAMICA exercises around kind of what could go wrong and what steps would we take if they were going to go wrong, right? And I don't know anything about the Taylor Swift thing, but a DDoS attack would seem to be very up there in terms of where that kind of analysis would call out that kind of thing, and therefore what steps as an organization should you take should that happen, right?
Okay, chaps, let's wrap this up. Marcus, it was great to have a bit of a chat with you. I'm looking forward to EuroSTAR now. All right, well, thanks Rich, thanks Marcus, and we're just going to leave you to it, and we'll see you all next time. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Why Didn't You Test That podcast. To continue the conversation, head over to curiositysoftware.ie. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.